Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Environmental Planning Commission meeting of March 1st, 2023. I call the meeting to order. It is 7 o'clock p.m. For those joining us in person, please note that due to our hybrid environment, audio and video presentations can no longer be shared from the lectern. Requests to show an audio or video presentation during a meeting should be directed to epc@mountainview.gov by 4:30 p.m. on the meeting date. Additionally, due to our hybrid environment, we will no longer have speakers line up on an item. Anyone wishing to address the EPC in person must complete a yellow speaker card. Please indicate the name you would like to be called when it is your turn to speak and the item number on which you wish to speak. Please complete one yellow speaker card for each item on which you wish to speak and turn them into the EPC clerk as soon as possible, but no later than the call for public comment on the item you are speaking on. Instructions for addressing the commission virtually may be found on the posted agenda. Now I'll call the EPC clerk to proceed with roll call, please. Should we? Everything?
We have all the commissioners here except Commissioner Gutierrez.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, on to Agenda 3.1, Environmental Planning Commission meeting minutes of February 1st, 2023. Do we have any discussion items for the minutes? No, I see none. Then we will take public comment. I will read this. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on the minutes, please fill out the yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on the minutes, please click the raise hand button in Zoom, press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6.
So I don't have any speaker on Zoom or in person.
Thank you so much. Do we have, a motion? Thank you. Ms. Haymeyer, Commissioner Haymeyer, please.
I motion to approve the minutes for the February 1st meeting as submitted by staff.
And we have a second. Commissioner Nunes.
I think we're having a technical difficulty where we can't see the motion and the votes. Is the voting system working on your end? Okay, you can see it?
It's changing itself. Yeah.
Okay, we may need to do a roll call vote in that case.
No problem. Go ahead.
All right, Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Cranston?
Aye.
Commissioner Haymeyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Nunes?
Aye.
Commissioner Dancy?
Aye.
And Chair In?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. Now on to Agenda 4, Oral Communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the EPC on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the Commission from acting on non-agenda items. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on non-agenda items, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on non-agenda items, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. EPC clerk, are there any?
There's no speaker on Zoom or speaker in person.
Okay, great. Thank you. So then we will move on to new business. Item 5.1, the 2022 Annual Progress Report 2015 to 2023 Housing Element. We'll first have a staff presentation, then questions by EPC, followed by the public comment. At the closure of public comment, the Commission will then deliberate and take action. Staff presentation will be given by Ellen Yao, planner. And you please may begin.
having bad technology luck tonight. There we go. I think it's working. Thanks.
All right, let's get the meeting rolling. Good evening, commissioners. Thank you, Chair Yin. So tonight, I have the item for the 2022 Housing Element Annual Progress Report. So every So tonight, we'll be going over the annual progress report for the year 2022. This is the last year of the 5th cycle housing element progress report. And so the housing element is a state mandated chapter of the general plan. And the purpose of the annual reporting is to report to our state agency, the HCD, and to report on our building permit activity, specifically permits that are issued. This is also a way for us to track our policy and program implementation every year. As part of that progress report, we report on the regional housing needs allocation and the percentage of units that we are building, specifically on building permit issued. In the report, in the staff report and in the exhibits, the table highlights several progress for each project. We have entitlements approved, building permits issued, and final occupancy certified. Specifically for meeting the regional housing needs assessment, we report on building permits issued. You can see on this chart, this is specifically the 2015 to 2023 allocation. The total is 2,926, and it's broken down by various income categories. This table shows the current progress meeting the RHNA goal. This covers 2015 to 2022. In the last column, you can see the percentage of our progress. And you can see that the city far exceeds the requirement for the above moderate units, but our very low and our moderate are a little behind. Overall, excluding the excess in above moderate, we're currently around 58% of our overall RHNA. Back in 2019, the state passed SB 35. That requirement requires jurisdictions to approve projects ministerially if they are not able to make progress on their RHNA goals for very low and low. This means usually they track it mid-cycle, so every 4 years you have to make up to 50% progress. Since this is the last half of this cycle, we'd need to be at 100%. A lot of cities in the state do qualify for SB 35 just because it's quite hard to meet the very low and low thresholds. The next couple of slides, I just want to highlight a lot of the projects that have been approved. These are specifically the ones that were approved in 2022. We have Lot 12. Out of that, we have 80 very low units and 39 low units. For the 334 San Antonio Road project that was approved near the end of last year, there's a total of 62 units, and there's 10 low units as part of that development project. I'm sure you guys are very well aware of the 1265 Montecito and 555 West Middlefield Road. I highlight a couple of very important projects. Montecito is 100% affordable, a total of 86 units. One is a manager unit, but you can see it does provide 58 very low and 27 low, so it's hitting some of those smaller target income categories. And then for 555 West Middlefield, we're able to get 16 moderate. That's usually a tough category to provide units for. And then 601 to 649 Escuela Avenue was a market rate development. There's a mixed use component at the bottom floor. It provides a total of 4 BMR units as part of our inclusionary ordinance. This is the last slide going over some of these projects. There are 730 Central Avenue, 870 East El Camino, and 1057 El Monte Avenue. And then this is coming up on a couple of last slides that I have. This one highlights the funding that we have for housing. We know that a lot of the projects we have in the city, it's really hard to meet some of the lower target units, the lower income targets, and a lot of it has to do with funding. The city has various sources that we provide for development projects that come in. Specifically, we have the Notice of Funding Availability, known as a NOFA, and this is a significant portion of the funds the city provides for developers. And you can see on the slide, it does signify some of the major projects that you guys have reviewed or will review: 1020 Terabella, 1265 Montecito, and Lot 12 are some of the projects that have received NOFA funding. There's also the countywide Measure A funding that also supplements each of those projects I've mentioned before. And federal funds like CDBG and home funds have also been used to do conversions like the Crestview Hotel. And upcoming for you guys to consider, 87 East Evelyn right now is going through, has already completed an RFQ and will be going for an RFP. And that will also have city funding to support the development of affordable housing on that site. So tonight, it's for you to receive the report and to recommend the City Council to also accept the report. It is a state mandated housing element annual progress report. We're required to submit it by April 1st. So, every year around this time is when you hear this presentation. So we'll be presenting this to council on March 28th, and then we will submit it to HCD soon after. So that concludes my presentation. I have Eric Anderson, Advanced Planning Manager here, and Wayne Chen, Assistant Director of Community Development online. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yao. Now we'll take questions from the EPC. Chair Cranston. I'm sorry, Chair Cranston. Commissioner Cranston, please.
So just a kind of a general question. It's two-part. One is this cycle and the next cycle. What's the implication of not accomplishing something that was set out in the? And if we say that we don't say that we've achieved it, is there any implication this time, and will that change in the next cycle?
Thank you, Commissioner. Eric Anderson, Advanced Planning Manager. So yes, there are implications of not completing programs. In every cycle, there are implications of not making progress on programs. Where obviously the state has taken a much greater role in actually enforcing that in jurisdictions that aren't making progress. And so generally what ends up happening, or what has happened over the previous cycles, is that we identify these things that we're doing that are related to the program, and there's some discretion or flexibility as to how well those things are related to the program. I think in the next 8 years, we will see how much discretion and flexibility there is. This is a whole new world that we're entering into with this new housing element cycle. And I'm not sure that there are a lot of other cities' experiences that we can look to, other than maybe some really, really bad actors that the state is enforcing against right now.
So if we're, I guess as a follow-up, so if we've not, so I sent, for the rest of the commission, I sent about 8 items to staff saying the answer isn't actually addressing what the action was, or it's incomplete. So for this cycle, it's kind of since we're at the end, is the last one, it's kind of a no big deal. We don't care, but we don't, next cycle, we need to be careful.
Oh no, it's not no big deal. I think, we thank you for sending the questions, and I think we can have a conversation about the ones that you highlighted. We're happy to discuss those. And certainly, in further review, we can provide responses that are that kind of better address your questions, and we're happy to discuss those right now. But like I said, the relationship to the programs and the objectives, there's always a little bit of discretion and flexibility in that. And so those items that you brought up, and again, we're happy to discuss them individually, we do have responses that can better address those objectives.
I guess I don't want to keep all of my fellow commissioners here if it's not something that's productive necessarily. If it's something you can address and it's updated before it goes to the consent item for council, then I'd be fine with that. I'm trying to decide whether is it worth going through them. It's a little tedious. So I'm just trying to gauge.
I'm happy to provide some additional context as well. As the Community Development Director,
Wayne
voice from on high.
That speaks.
Hello, everyone. Just to add on to what Eric was just saying, in terms of maybe providing a separate follow-up to your questions, Commissioner Cranston, is that the various items that we list in terms of the progress that we've made on various housing efforts do respond to, I think that table has several columns, and one of the columns talks about kind of the big picture pieces, and the second column talks about these very specific objectives that were written up in the housing element. And that language was provided and written up, 8 years ago. And we're not able to change that language, those objectives. So every year, even if needs evolve, that language needs to stay. And so now 8 years later, over the course of the past 8 years, different situations, different needs, and different efforts have come up that we've responded to. And so the intent was that the items listed in those rows were meant to address the major category for that row, but the needs may have evolved a little bit from the way it got written up in terms of the objectives language in the second column. So I think in our response back to you, we can provide a little bit more context to show how it does seek to meet the intent of the specific objective language. And then we can also talk a little bit about how it meets the overall objective given the evolving nature of that item over the last 8 years. So there's a little bit of a constraint there in terms of reporting because the language is a little bit older, needs have changed, but I think we can also provide some clarification in terms of how the written information does, we feel, achieve the.
You're okay with not having all 8 discussed? Since you guys know what the 8 questions are, do you feel like it's going to be tedious and take a very long time, or do you?
No, I mean, it's, 6 items from the commissioner. No, I think we can probably cover them in a few bullet points in each item. Is that, if that's something that the commission wants to hear, I'm happy to go over them.
Okay, I think if it doesn't take up a whole lot of time.
Okay,
we can run through them in bullet points.
We can run through the bullet points, sure.
That'd be great, thank you.
Ellen, can you share the table D on the screen?
list them if you just want to talk to them or something.
It's just mainly for the public also to know what the questions are.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
So the ones that I sent, the first one was on page 28. So all my questions were in the section, table D, which is where the action, there's like a small bullet item, as Wayne mentioned, is a little bit broader description, and then there's the commentary. The first one was on page 28, the first item, I'm going by the second column, Wayne, so it says review residential development standards to ensure that they have flexibility in the zoning code to allow for innovative housing types such as co-housing, shared housing, and intergenerational housing. And when I read through the list of things, they were all things that were done, but they didn't necessarily tie, I didn't understand them as addressing that review residential development standards for innovative housing types. So, do you wish to comment on that?
Assistant Director Chen, can you hear?
I think we're having some technical difficulties. He's not receiving the
Okay,
audio input here.
we'll give that,
Come back to
we can come back to this, right? Yes, okay. We're going to move on.
Well,
Unless you have bullet point answers that can just.
I can go through them. I'm concerned that if the Assistant Community Development Director can't hear us, then
Right.
people in the public can't hear us.
Correct.
Like listening in online.
Yeah.
And that the audio is not hearing. So that's, to me, I think, kind of a bigger issue that we might need to address for the public. And might I suggest we take a brief
Moment.
5-minute moment to see if we can resolve this and then start again?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
We will return in 5 minutes.
Oh, is he back on now? Oh. Oh, yeah. She saw all of the.
Okay, we are now back resuming the EPC meeting. Just in case, I think it'd be good to repeat it so that Wayne can hear it.
Okay, so the first one I submitted was the first item on page 28 in the report, and it was specifically, in my mind, I wasn't able to tie the answer to the review residential development standards to ensure that there is flexibility in the zoning code to allow for innovative housing types such as co-housing, shared housing, and intergenerational housing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, and apologies for losing the audio here. So I think I can hear just fine now. I can take a first stab at a response, and then if Eric and Ellen have anything to add. So on that row for innovative housing programs, the specific objective written 8 years ago was, as you read, Commissioner, review standards, et cetera. Over that period of time, I think in terms of the opportunities that arose for us, we feel that they do represent innovative housing programs. And then I think what we can do is at least verbally explain how it could also tie into development standards. So certainly the LinkedIn prepayment was one of the first of its kind in terms of having employer partner with the local jurisdiction in terms of advancing fees that we can use to invest in housing. But as we get to 2019, that 716 unit apartment building is the 777 West Middlefield project. You may know it as a gatekeeper project that included a partnership with the Mountain View Wisman School District, which is now under construction for 144 a teacher and staff housing project as part of that 716 unit project. So that's the first of its kind in Mountain View. So we felt that was an innovative housing project and program. The Life Moves Home Key interim housing program, also the first of its kind in Mountain View, and actually the first of its kind we understand in the Bay Area and even the state. And now as a result of this program, there are several projects that are underway in the Bay Area. Then when we move down to the Crestview Hotel, that is also our first hotel conversion project into a permanent housing project, primarily to serve folks who have been or are at risk of homelessness. And to tie that last one back in, the El Camino Real Precise Plan has flexibility in the zoning code and in the plan that allows for this conversion to take place for a hotel use to be also converted into on the same site into a permanent housing use. And then for the Life Moves Home Key program, there was the ability to use an industrial zone site to be able to be used for this interim housing project. So we thought they're innovative housing programs by themselves. And then also there were parts of it that were enabled because of the flexibility in the zoning code. So I think that was the rationale for those projects and tying it to that row.
Okay, so if I understood what you said earlier, you're tying back to the term innovative housing programs, not necessarily tying to the action that was underneath it, that you say may have evolved away from it. I mean, I would agree those are innovative housing programs, but you're saying we don't in the future have to tie to the second level bullet? Is that going to be true in the future?
So I think in this case, there is a typo here that we do need to correct with the what goes to the council. There are actually two objectives to this housing element program. The second one, which is much more closely related to these four items that Mr. Chen brought up, is conduct meetings with housing developers to review land and financial resources, development incentives, and the city's entitlement process to permit alternative and innovative housing developments. So that's, you know, obviously this ongoing process that we go through with anybody who's interested in doing these innovative projects, and we facilitate them and work with them to make them happen through various planning processes. I'll also add that, you know, and just kind of reconfirm what Mr. Chen said, especially with respect to El Camino. You know, we were intentional when we devised the El Camino Precise Plan to really allow a flexible range of residential types in El Camino. You know, we have this FAR standard that's a density standard. That is how we allow a broad range of unit types, unit sizes. We don't set standards on like what the units have to be made up of or anything like that. So really innovative unit types and development types can happen on El Camino and other similar precise plan areas. And those were developed during this, you know, in the early part of this cycle.
Thank you. The next one is actually the second one down. It says units for large households, and it has specifically ensure at least 25%. And I simply noted, you haven't said, did we hit the number? So it seemed like a very specific, measurable objective, and we didn't actually answer the objective. And
yeah, so actually we just did that review. All of the projects that we've done in the past, the ones that are family oriented, they've all had 25% 3-bedroom.
So we could add that back in.
We made that one, yeah.
The next one is on the next page, page 29, first bullet, same kind of thing. It said ensure 20% boomerang funds, and nowhere did it say that we actually did 20%. So it was, again, metric specific.
So these funds are actually very small amount in this kind of ongoing use of the redevelopment agency. We use a lot of former redevelopment agency funds for affordable housing. As it says here, we committed $1 million to the Lot 12 project. This is, you know, the majority, a very significant proportion of the redevelopment funds that we use for affordable. You know, we use them for affordable housing. This $1 million is definitely much more than the 20% that we have there. But you're right, we don't have a denominator there. We can work on generating that for council.
The next one was the last one on that page. It's this, you know, priorities for affordable units, and it listed a fairly detailed thing of what we should do, but the summary didn't actually say, is it working? And so it was, we have an action, but my reaction was, okay, did it work? Are we getting it done? So it didn't feel like it wasn't a thumbs up or kind of thumbs down. It was, we did something.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment, and I think it'd be best if we pass it to Assistant Director. I think when he originally talked about how we are reporting for this, you do have to acknowledge that this was written almost a decade ago. So as things are progressing through the 5th cycle, some things that do come up in terms of new state laws and legal implications, and so we can provide a little bit more clarification on that. So if Assistant Director Wayne Chen can hop on.
Yes, thank you, Ellen. And yes, we don't have a specific number for this, in part because the city does have a live-work preference, but it may not always be feasible to implement it or to achieve this in the various projects. We have it as part of our BMR program. We also have it as part of our NOFA program, where we fund affordable housing developers. And certainly in the NOFA program, typically a developer needs to access multiple funding sources, state and federal. and there are state and federal fair housing laws that govern live work preference. And so we always have the caveat when we bring the items to council for consideration that while we do have a live work policy, it's implemented to the extent feasible and depending on legal and funding considerations and in other provisions. And so there are some things that we may not be able to fully implement and achieve that goal because there are limitations on achieving that. So I wanted to provide that context. We always have a caveat of we have the policy, but we may not always be able to achieve it on some or even all the units, depending on the funding sources and other factors.
Next one is on the following page 30. The action was specific. This may be one where your top level doesn't match up. So it says partnership with the county, but it specifically said raise residents' awareness about housing programs offered by the county. And the description is way the city is working with them, but it didn't actually, to me, say how are you raising resident awareness of the programs, and that so it didn't feel like it was responsive to that second level bullet, which was raise residents' awareness, not resident awareness.
Yeah, I think this is one of those cases where Mr. Chen was saying earlier, you know, the tools that we've had over the last 8 years and the efficacy of those tools have really changed towards the goals of partnering with the county. Really becoming much more of a strong partnership in terms of generating housing, generating funding, managing housing, and the like. So that's really what we're highlighting there. These programs are, many of them still exist and are still offered, and we can still direct to them through the, through the tenant mediation program and the CSFRA program and the like. But really the value in the that we're getting from our partnerships is really in kind of what's discussed here in terms of funding opportunities and additional collaboration opportunities. I don't know if Mr. Chen has anything to add.
Thanks, Eric. I can add an example here. So one example of a partnership with the county is the Crestview Hotel project. As Eric mentioned, that it does involve a funding partnership, and the Crestview Hotel project is a Measure A project. And we've conducted several community outreach meetings. We have another one planned next month. We've also created a Crestview website and also shared information through press releases and the Mountain View, the View periodic mailer that we send out to folks. And then we also have a distribution list that we send out to folks about Crestview. So that is one example where it's both a partnership with the county, it involves funding, and then we're also trying to increase resident awareness by putting this information up on the website and also holding community meetings. And then we will be doing a similar sort of information campaigns when we have other Measure A funded projects come up. Those projects will be listed on the website as well. I think one other line in there that talks about staff participates in regional discussions to discuss new regulations or collaboration or other program. The information that we're providing a lot now also occurs through our Housing and Eviction Help Center, and that's an in-person resource. So that is one additional piece that we're doing that's beyond online information. So that's another resource that is an example where we're taking the the regional meetings and the partnerships, and then providing it through in-person channels as well. So those are some examples of partnerships and a couple of examples about how we try to promote resources available to increase resident awareness of either housing opportunities or other programmatic options for them.
Thank you. And then the last one was on page 39. It says energy efficiency, encourage the use of residential developers to maximize. Well, you can read the whole thing. And the answer was like, what does that have to do with encouraging the developers to use energy? So it didn't feel like it answered that item to me.
So I think that is one good example of a project where we use the power of the purse to encourage a residential developer, a residential property owner to rehabilitate for increased energy efficiency. So it does actually refer to, I think, the objective, but I also think there is something that we can say here about our ongoing actions, including our building permit reach codes, which all encourage energy efficiency across a broad range of residential developments, and as well as just our ongoing, things like the North Bay Shore and East Wisman precise plans, which provide incentives for higher level green building. So those could certainly be added in terms of ongoing actions that we're taking.
Right. So I mean, the bottom line on all this is I'm going to be really interested in if staff can get some understanding of how this changes in cycle 6, because I think many of us have viewed this review as checkbox. Council views it as a consent item and probably doesn't even get enough votes to talk about. And I'm just, as I look through this, I'm like, is if we answer these things this way, the next time on cycle 6, the first round, is HCD going to come back and say bad mountain view, and other consequences? So I appreciate the feedback on this. If maybe we need to think about how we answer these in the future to make sure that HCD doesn't come back and spank us. So, thanks.
Are there any other questions from other commissioners? Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to respond just very briefly to Commissioner Cranston's comments. I think the expectation is that there will be more rigorous oversight over the implementation of these programs in this cycle. So during the 5th cycle is when there were numerous pieces of legislation enacted beginning in about 2017, foreshadowing what we're all going through right now in terms of the adoption of the 6th cycle housing element. And as we all know, the state has increased its personnel for enforcement purposes. So I think as we are working on the 6th cycle, we want to be very cognizant that it's very likely that the state will be looking for kind of more progress and more concrete progress.
Any other questions, commissioners? Yes, Vice Chair Dempsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just had a couple of just really very high-level questions. How is this progress report actually used? So is it purely a regulatory filing? Nobody else sees it? It's just the exhibit that was given to us. There's no prose description. It's just simply sent off to HCD, and we hope they like it. So if you could tell me a little bit more about how this is used, that'd be helpful.
So at the basic level, yes, right? It's sent off to HCD, but then it's also made public, and all the data from it is also made public and put together with progress reports from every other jurisdiction in the state, so that we're being compared against one another, and any watchdog group from the state can log on and see all of these reports and make sure that everybody's making progress. So really, that's the purpose, is to just increase the transparency of what we're doing in the city to promote housing.
Okay. So the other, maybe this is more of an observation than a question, but I know, like, in the staff report, there's, to me, it felt like there was a little bit of a missed opportunity to talk about, now, Treo and CISFRA were mentioned as part of our larger housing plan for cycle 6. But we don't say, but there's no detail given about essentially what we've delivered with them. I mean, those are great programs. They've done a lot of good in Mountain View in terms of helping people that get displaced or keeping people from being displaced. That's really, really important, especially in an environment where it's not easy to build as much housing as we'd like to. I don't think the staff report is exactly what you're sending to HCD, so I get that. But I think to the extent that anyone might be looking to, well, at least included, I think, when you send it off to council, but I think we, as a city, should never miss an opportunity to talk about, frankly, some of the great work that the city has been doing to help folks not experience housing displacement, that's kind of sort of the point of the housing element, right? Is we want people to have secure housing. So that just felt like a missed opportunity because y'all have done so many good things in other environments. I just don't want to miss a chance for the city to brag. That was it.
Any other questions from the commission? Go ahead. Commissioner Nunez.
Thank you, Chair Yin. Quick question. I'll start. I think I have 3 questions. One, I think ought to be really easy. To what extent have you guys heard of any kind of like, fifth cycle COVID, force majeure type, like the state isn't going to be overly harsh if there was this crazy once in a century pandemic that threw supply chain for development into complete whack. Is that anything at all that is being like heard through the grapevine in terms of relief for not meeting any kind of fifth cycle targets?
No, I haven't heard anything like that. And certainly, SB 35 is in effect. Ms. Yao brought that up during the meeting. We are expected to continue to produce housing and meet our RENA targets, and the main consequence of that is ministerial approval of certain development projects. That has not changed. The review of programs, as Ms. Lee said, the escalating of state enforcement was really foreseen as being a big part of the 6th cycle, which is starting now. So I think any kind of flexibility on housing element programs hasn't necessarily changed through COVID.
Cool. I didn't think so. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that. So along those lines, to some extent, I'm going to go back to that godforsaken document that we were just on with the underutilized sites program or goal or what have you, and then also kind of just comparing that to the update zoning ordinance row as well. One thing that caught my interest was that the underutilized sites progress box notes at the very end, the city is currently reviewing the R3 zoning standards and considering modifications to increase opportunities for additional housing types. So I guess I'm curious about 2 things, but the first is, What are the implications, if any, between the City of Mountain View and HCD and or state enforcement if we cite as progress for a 5th cycle goal something that is to happen in the future, and they accept that, and then we don't do it?
What page was of the?
27 of the PDF.
Ellen, are you able to bring that
Yeah.
up too?
Yeah,
Just-
I could do that.
Thank you.
So the status report does not say that we have adopted anything. It doesn't. It's not making any statement that's factually untrue. I would also point to the previous sentences that talk about actual actions that we've taken, actual, precise plans that we've adopted, code amendments that we've made that actually do support this objective of zoning amendments that take advantage of underutilized sites. So I would say that the risk of this language is fairly low. We have certainly met our obligations under this cycle for no net loss. We've maintained our inventory and our capacity in our inventory, and I think that's the type of quantitative measure that the oversight agencies would be looking at to evaluate whether we have made progress on this program.
Right, and the reason why I'm bringing that up, and not trying to argue anything here, but the reason why I'm bringing it up is because it just this concept of I'm just going to kind of reflect back what I heard here. The risk of this language is low. Adding some qualification of risk to language, it just seems to me like including something in there that's just saying we're considering this. It seems to me almost like something that got appended to it a little bit and after the fact in a way, especially if when I'm looking at a couple items above that, there's another box that says update zoning ordinance, where either A, that may have been a little bit more relevant in terms of including it in that piece. But even then, to me, just thinking of, including something that's in consideration as part of something that is soon to be in the past, strikes me as a little bit odd. And I'm not gonna ask for any further clarification or ask for any kind of remediation or anything like that. I just kind of wanted to point that out. The third question, okay, I'll just turn this into a statement and then ask another third question. Regardless of where in this document that R3 tidbit comes in, one of the things that does call into question for me, even if we only have maybe relatively few acreage under R4, is if we are considering modifying our R3 standards, and we're telling HCD that that's something that we're considering, and if it turns out that those new development standards would make it so that it is to some extent a more intensive land use than R4, then it seems to me like we also ought to include some kind of language in that says, and will monitor for impacts to R4 such that R4 remains a more intensive land use after any modifications done to R3. So that's one thing I'll say on that front. And then the last bit that I'm gonna ask here has to do with the above moderate income. So I'm curious if, and I actually don't know this, so I'm hoping to get some clarification here for my own benefit as well. Do we monitor of the number of units that were entitled or like received building permits? I get confused if that's the same thing. Do we track after the fact how many of those have actually been constructed and built, like physically brought into reality?
Sorry, the number of above moderate units?
Or just generally, so when we entitle or give building permits, do we then monitor and or track how many have physically become actual units?
So entitlements, yes. Building permits, especially for developer projects, there's so much that has to be done in order to get to the building permit. It is very, very, very rare for a project to get a building permit and then not proceed. It does happen, but it's very rare. It's much more common for things like single family additions, things like like the smaller scale things where it doesn't take a whole lot to actually get the permit. We do, I don't have that data in front of me about how many entitlements actually turn into projects. We did a little bit of that analysis during this sixth cycle housing element. We found that it was relatively high. It was higher than, we had heard that San Jose's was like in the 20 or 30% or something like that. It's much, much higher here. People do see a lot of value in actually moving forward with projects here. But I don't have that number right in front of me.
So then if I was to ask and I'm thinking the answer is no here, but just want to make sure. If I was to ask very directly, like how many of the above moderate units were entitled during the fifth cycle element? Or fifth cycle housing element? Do we have that number?
How many above moderate units were entitled during the fifth cycle
housing element? If so, it would be good to know.
Yeah, I certainly don't have that number in front of me. It would take some crunching with our data sources. We have a permit tracking system that we could get that number out of. But yeah, it's not something that I have in front of me.
Does the voice of Wayne Chen possibly know that?
No, I would have it before he would.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I just trying to exhaust my options here. So the reason why I'm bringing that up is because, as we are looking at the sixth cycle here, and it's clear. Obviously, the number of above moderate income units, 4.6K, to like 4.8, almost 9K that we're saying we're going to complete in the sixth cycle, right? It would be just good to know what percentage of those, units that get a building permit actually get delivered, because as we're looking towards this sixth cycle, I think that's a extremely pertinent data point that we would want to know. And maybe not even just for the above moderate, but for like all the other types as well. So that would be good to know as a city body. Thank you.
Planner Yao, I believe, has something to say.
Yeah, I mean, we do have that information in our annual progress report. We track entitled number of units at all the income levels. We have tracked for building permit issued, which is what we specifically report to meet our RENA thresholds. And there's also completed, which is final occupancy. So that's reported in our annual housing report, and you will see it in table A2, which is broke up into multiple segments. And so that information is presented to HCD, and I can't share my screen right now, but
Well, the problem is that it only goes back, it's only the 1 year. So it doesn't have any cumulative.
yeah, so
Right.
HCD is making progress on that right now. If you go online to their dashboard, it goes up to 2018, so it has a short portion of the last cycle.
That's true. Yeah.
So it's continually building, and so, you know, you'll get more of a broader picture. If you're just looking at Mountain View, we do need to do a little bit more data crunching. But since, you know, HCD has made a more robust annual progress report survey form for us to fill out, we kind of track all of that.
Thank you very much. I know you guys work really hard on this, and so I just appreciate the support.
Okay. Any other commissioners? Final call. I just had a very, very quick question, and that is looking towards this next cycle. I know we talk a lot about consequences of missing numbers. I know that the state is aware that we don't build housing, and there are larger forces at play. If they are doing a comparison of cities to cities, are there any, I don't want to say rewards, but are there, you've got the stick and you've got the carrot. Are there any carrots that we know of that are given out to cities who are genuinely moving forward in their numbers?
I do believe that the pro-housing designation, which is a application process that we're going through right now to get special certification with the state, I do believe there's some parts of the pro-housing designation that relate to actual housing production. And so that gives you front row for grants and other funding opportunities from the state. So there are some carrots.
Okay.
Not sure if Mr. Chen knows of any others.
Yeah, I was curious if it was. I was curious if those carrots came in terms of funding to help for more affordable units, since that is what we're really trying to achieve. These are the targets that we're not hitting, and so we need assistance in that. And I just want to know if there were any details that we don't know that someone could share with us if they did.
Just to add to what Eric was saying, it's not directly tied to achievement of numbers, but there is a state program called the Local Housing Trust Fund Program, and that is a program that we'll be applying for as well. That's connected in part to the pro-housing designation, and also for the city to apply for it, because we are advancing on housing programs. To my knowledge, there hasn't, again, been other funding sources that tied to numbers. We'll see if that changes in this next cycle. Mostly, it has been tied to cities being able to provide, first, obviously having a compliant housing element, but then also implementation of different policies and programs. That's mostly where that connection to the housing element has been with funding programs.
Thank you, Mr. Chen. All right, with no more questions then, we'll move on to public comment. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on this item, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on this item, please click the raise hand button on Zoom, or in Zoom, or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6.
I don't see any speaker on Zoom, and there's no speaker here in person.
Okay, thank you very much. All right then, we will now deliberate as a committee or commission and or make motions. Commissioner Nunez? Oh, that was left over. Okay. Commissioner Clark, please.
I'll go ahead. Go ahead and move that we recommend to the City Council that they accept the 2022 annual progress report for the 2015 through 2023 housing element.
Do we have a second for this motion?
Seconded.
Thank you. Vice Chair Dempsey.
Okay, we will need to do a roll call vote again.
No problem.
Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Commissioner Cranston,
Aye.
Commissioner Haymeyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Nunes,
Aye.
Vice Chair Dempsey,
Aye.
and Chair In.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 6-0 with Commissioner Gutierrez absent.
Thank you. On to Agenda 5.2, the 2022 Annual Progress Report, 2030 General Plan. We'll first have a staff presentation, then questions by the EPC, followed by public comment. At the closure of public comment, the Commission will then deliberate and take action. Staff presentation will be from Brittany Whitehill, Planner. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners, and thanks for bearing with us through the interesting technical difficulties of tonight. My name is Brittany Whitehill, and I will be presenting this item, and I'm joined by Eric Anderson, our Advanced Planning Manager. The item in front of you consists of an annual progress report of the city's General Plan Action Plan. So in 2012, the City Council adopted the 2030 General Plan and related General Plan Action Plan. The 2030 General Plan Action Plan is a list of action items that carry out the general plan's goals and policies. These action items include programs, plans, studies, ordinance updates, and other measures. The EPC is responsible for the annual review of the General Plan Action Plan in the form of an annual progress report, and for monitoring the progress that the city is making on implementing the general plan. This year, staff has provided 3 tables of general plan action items for the EPC's review. Table 1 includes items that have not yet been started, are currently in progress, or were completed during 2022. Table 2 includes items that were completed prior to 2022. And Table 3 includes items which are achieved through day-to-day operations. Since last year's general plan APR, 2 items have been completed. In January of this year, the City Council approved amendments to the zoning ordinance to allow residential mixed-use village center developments on sites where the general plan allows residential uses in the commercial neighborhood, CN, and commercial services, CS zoning districts. And similar amendments to the El Camino Real and Grant Phillis precise plans were also approved. Additionally, during 2022, the portion of the Bay Trail within Mountain View was completed, and the city will continue to collaborate with neighboring jurisdictions to help complete the Bay Trail in its entirety, such as by issuing letters of support. So following a recommendation from the EPC, the General Plan APR will be presented to City Council on March 28th of this year, and shortly thereafter forwarded on to the California Office of Planning and Research, or OPR. We would also like to highlight that the council goal setting process for fiscal years 23 to 25 is currently underway. Yesterday, the City Council held a study session on the upcoming goal setting process. The purpose of this study session was to review and confirm the city's existing strategic priorities and identify potential projects for inclusion on the upcoming work plan. Throughout the month of March, staff will present the draft council goals to advisory bodies, including the EPC, to solicit input. And this item is tentatively scheduled to be reviewed by the EPC on March 22nd. So in conclusion, staff recommends that the EPC review and recommend that the City Council accept the 2022 General Plan Annual Progress Report. I'm happy to answer any questions, and like I said, Eric is also available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Whitehill. We will now turn it over to the Commission for questions. Do we have any questions? Commissioner Nunes.
Yeah, quick question. I know it's called the 2030 General Plan. Is that like the actual expiration date of it? Is there like a last year for which like the annual progress report is supposed to be submitted? Or is it like once we've achieved all of the things that we were supposed to progress, we have to start a new general? Like what's the progress on something begets an end? So I'm wondering where the end is.
That's a great question, Commissioner Nunez. So it really is an art more than a science. The year 2030 was chosen as a planning target in during the general plan update process back in 2012. So it was kind of the outreach was, what do you envision the city to be like in 2030, and what are we trying to get to, and what are our goals, and so it was kind of this visioning target, and so that's the title of the general plan, is the vision for 2030. What happens if we get to 2030 and we're still 2031 and we're still using a 2030 general plan? Well, not much, but we should be, revising general plans on the order of every 15 to 20 years. So it's a signal that we should be working on it. As far as like completing the action items from the general plan, no, we're not required to complete everything. As I'm sure you know, priorities change, and a city is never done. There's always new things to work on, and new priorities and new challenges to address. And so, you will see that some of these action items are 2012 priorities. Some of them have been partially addressed. Some of them have been, less comprehensive, addressed in some areas, but not in others. And so that's just the reality of implementing long-term plans. And so as we start to contemplate whether we need to do a general plan update, it's the type of thing where we can kind of look through these and say, which of these actions really need to be moved forward, which of them have kind of lost their importance, their reason for being. So, like I said, an art, not a science. There's nothing concrete about completing things or getting to a particular year in this process.
Thanks.
Commissioner Dempsey, or Vice Chair Dempsey, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to follow up on that a little bit. Is there a general plan update scheduled? What's sort of the process for when we get to go back over not just the general plan, but really sort of this list of things we said we were going to do? What is the process for going back over that and making sure everything that we like is on the list and everything we don't care about is off?
Yeah, another great question. We don't have a formal process for doing that. Now, we were talking about, the council ideas for the next 2 years, and the last night's council meeting, and one of the items that came up from one of the council members was, let's clean up some of our codes and our charter and some other, is there maintenance work that we need to do for our codes and policies? And so that'll be brought forward to this commission as something for you to evaluate. And I just bring it up as a kind of question and kind of a acknowledgement that there's awareness out there that there is, these things need to be maintained and cleaned up every once in a while. But if we haven't been kind of instructed to do so, it is not a clear priority for us to work on.
Well, hopefully we can put a flag on that tonight. The only other question I had is, so who is the audience and what is the impetus for doing this? Is it a state mandate? I forget if it's in the government code or not. I know we sent it to OPR. Do we do this primarily because OPR and state statute requires it, or do we do it because this is something that council relies on in doing their own work?
Well, I can't speak for council in how they use this information. It is required. And I think it's required for a reason. Again, transparency. We want to make sure that the public can see these reports and what we're working on. And to the extent that it is an opportunity for decision makers to, see this information and have it inform their priorities and their decision making, it's good to have it in the public eye every year.
Thank you, Eric. I've got comments, but I'll save them for comment section.
Commissioner Cranston.
So I'm very focused on housing element. So is there, the housing element is something that's required, as part of the general plan. If we're not making progress in the general plan items, does that have any implications on the housing element going forward?
No, there's special legislation that relates specifically to the housing element. The general plan is much more fully within the city's own legislative power. The housing element is kind of unique in its state oversight. I will say, periodically there are new laws that come out that say general plans have to include X. And we do kind of keep track of those and make sure that we're keeping up to date on those. And as far as I know, the only item that we still have to do has to do with the local hazard mitigation plan, which is actually being worked on right now by the county. So once that happens, we'll integrate it by reference into the general plan.
And then I guess a second question. It struck me that, hey, the general plan was adopted in 2013, and all the action items had to be done within 4 to 10 years. And guess what? It's 2013. But there was this thing called COVID that kind of mucked everything up. Is there any kind of precedence for a kind of a finding that says that there's some still good things that we haven't done yet. Is there any kind of precedence for a finding that says, hey, because of COVID, we prioritized the health of our people and our community, and so we didn't work on some of these things, and so we're going to extend those items for 3 more years, and so you have until 2026 to get these done, and we won't next year be looking at all these things and saying we missed on all of them because we prioritized other things. I mean, is there any, or does it not matter that they were to be done in 10 years?
Well, the timelines given in the action plan are, advisory. They're kind of describing a couple of things. One is like the level of effort. 2 is, whether it's something where we need to do a lot of other things beforehand before we can get to those. And so generally they are more descriptive rather than mandatory. So in looking at them, the purpose of the timeline is to say, okay, is that something that we can foreseeably do in the next 2 years, or is it something that's probably going to have to wait 10 years, rather than we need to do it in 10 years.
No more questions? No more questions. Okay. Then we will go to public comment. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on this item, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on this item, please click the raise hand button on Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6.
I don't have any speaker on Zoom or in person.
Okay, thank you. And the commission will deliberate and take action. Does anyone have anything they want to deliberate? I believe Vice Chair Dempsey, you had mentioned.
No, I do. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, actually, I had kind of a lot I thought and felt as I was reading through this, and I think perhaps because it's a mandate and we got to send this report up to Sacramento. It's very easy for this to become sort of a road exercise, box checking, as we've said in other ways, in other cases. This is actually, to me, a really important management document. And I think that there's a lot of potential value in sort of redoubling our effort with this particular exercise, especially because the council right now is rethinking the work plan. When I read this, I was actually pretty surprised. I struggled with it because it was difficult to read. how much progress we were really making and how close we were to actually succeeding in doing what we said we were going to do. It was not clear. I really had to try to piece it together, and I was kind of surprised. There's missing data fields, there's missing comments. It made it very hard for me, putting myself into the shoes of a manager, like to look at this and say, well, are we doing what we said we would do? And I couldn't answer that question from looking at it. I really had to start piecing it together myself. And that's a really big missed opportunity, I think, in some ways. Like, when I looked at this, I saw there were a number of projects that we said we'd do in 4 to 10 years. It's been 10 plus years. Haven't even started them. And that happened there's a number of those in here. And that concerns me. It doesn't concern me that we didn't get to them. It concerns me that they're still on the list if we don't have any intention of doing it. How do what else do I want to say? I think that there is a little bit of a mismatch between what's on the list and what we actually intend to do. And that is sometimes why people get frustrated with government. And I think it's really, really important that if we put it on that list, it's because we mean it. And if we don't mean it, it shouldn't be on that list. And I think there's a great opportunity right now for us, or at least to recommend that this happen, that the city should have a serious discussion about anything that we don't think is a high enough priority, or we don't have the resources to do. More importantly, we should strike it off that list, and we should make space to put, I'm sure, new council priorities that they've got onto that list. But everything that goes on that list, we should mean, and we should have the resources for it, because I know how hard this department works. And I think we just couldn't get to all those things because we probably had too many things on the list. And that's a really important sort of management signal as the council's putting together their work plan for the next 10 years. I think getting a sense of, well, the last time we took a bite of this apple, we took too big of a bite. And maybe that means that we should all be a little bit tougher on ourselves, maybe a little bit more skeptical of what we can actually achieve. So we shoot at the stuff that's the most important, but we don't keep things that we don't mean on that list. And I could have a separate conversation about the kinds of data points I'd love to see in the summary or other little things, but I think my macro comment is simply that report told me there were way too many things that we kind of said we were going to do, and we didn't mean it, and we cannot keep doing that. And this is a wonderful opportunity for the city, I think, to really take a hard look at what we actually can do and what we really mean, and put it on that paper like we mean it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Cranston.
I had maybe a somewhat similar reaction, but maybe a different thought process on it. A lot of the things that haven't been completed to me still look like good things. Okay. As I mentioned before, something happened along the road and the world shut down and everything changed. And so in my mind, it was a question back to council and say, we kind of look at these things and say, a lot of these things probably are still worth working on. The fact that we haven't gotten them done in the 10 years doesn't mean they're not important. So either confirm that they are still valid priorities, or let's say we're going to give 3 more years to get these finished, because hey, the last 3 years we were doing other really important things. It's not a question of failure. Your comment that it wasn't important, I don't think that was the decision of the last couple of years. It was like, hey, people are getting sick and thrown out of houses. That was more important that people work on. So I don't necessarily view the fact that they're not complete as a message that they weren't important necessarily. It was, hey, we had something that was even more important that we had to do in the meantime. And so in my mind, it was, maybe the message back to council is, are these still important? If they are, then we should recognize the fact that staff was doing other things, you guys were doing other things during the last 3 years, and so we didn't have time to work on them. So let's keep on the list, but let's not say that they had to be done by 2023. Now we're going to say they got to be done by 2026. and now you work them into this year's plan and next year's plan and the year after going forward. So I didn't interpret it as they're not important. It was, I looked at them, they're all good things, but we didn't have the bandwidth to do that. So either validate and give more time, or say they aren't important, and look at your other list. That was kind of that's how I kind of looked at it.
Commissioner Nunes?
Yeah, so and I'm wrong here, staff, please throw me a lifeline. My understanding of the general plan is that it is supposed to, in some shape or form, act almost like the constitution of development and land use for a city. And just hearing this kind of line of thinking just kind of reminds me of like government class in high school and learning like, this, like, there's the originalists, like, no, the Constitution is like what it says and that's what it is. And then the living Constitution people arguing, hey, things change and it's a living, breathing document that needs to adapt to the situation. I would like to let the constitutional scholars have that debate and just look at kind of what in the state of California we have here, which is, almost like a mixture of both, with the general plan giving credence to that living constitution type of mentality and the housing element kind of coming in and being a little bit more of that, like, originalist, like what is written is what it is kind of approach. So I think there's a melding of the two, and it's nice that we're talking about both of those things today here. Personally, honestly, I think that the points raised by Vice Chair Dempsey and Commissioner Cranston here, at least in my mind, point a lot more towards not like if we only have so much life energy to give to the world. What this speaks to me is that collectively we can be thinking or devoting that energy a little bit more to the 2050 general plan, and not necessarily, kind of looking at the 2030 general plan in 2023 and working on, like validating or unvalidating or modifying this part of our, like system that is more of the living constitution type document for the city. So, if we want to provide some sort of like guidance as part of this, I guess I hear Commissioner Clark say transmittal a lot. I've never seen one of those. So if the council is going to read a transmittal, maybe we can say something like, hey, we think, we should start deliberating the 2050 general plan. I would be super down for that as a credence to, instead of kind of looking back and trying to re-modify something that's about to die off in 7 years, if we thrust into the future, then what's not important or what is no longer feasible or what we don't have the resources for will naturally just fall away, and we'll be getting a head start on what we need to do moving forward. So, those are my thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner Nunes. I was just thinking, and please, maybe staff can help me out. Our deliberation perhaps could, right now, stay focused on whether or not we approve the general plan update, and then we can deliberate the transmittal portion after that. Is that something we can do? Because I don't believe that what Commissioner Nunes had brought up is necessarily related to the approval of this general plan.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can deliberate in whatever order the commission wants. I think I recommend that if there is something that you want staff to transmit in the report to council, that you just have a majority say that with the recommendation. It's fine.
All right, well, why don't we go ahead and just take a quick straw poll to see if that is something the rest of the commission is in agreement with? Wanting to, just raise your hand real quick.
What are we straw polling? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm totally fine with just voting to like approve it as is. I'm speaking to Vice Chair Dempsey's concern around some of these almost like vestigial items just hanging around. What I'm, just to be clear, just to clarify, what I'm saying is if we were going to include any kind of message to council around that concern outside of just that straight approval that you just mentioned, that is the direction that I would take it. I'm not necessarily saying that I would only vote for this approval with such a message appended to it, to be clear.
Okay, just so I'm clear.
So I'm tossing this back to Vice Chair Dempsey.
I'm not totally certain what just got tossed to me.
Okay. All right. So, Commissioner Nunez, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I am going to just take a stab. I think Commissioner Nunez was working off of your statement about council perhaps looking at this general plan and deciding, are there things that need to be changed? It just seems to me that it's more of a discussion of what comes next with how we manage the general plan. Or is this something that you would like to be transmitted to council?
I can only tell you what what I had been thinking, which is, and it sounds like council is going to do it, is doing it now, which is that they're thinking through what they want to have in their work plan. As Commissioner Cranston said, this is a question of, if there's good stuff that we didn't get to because of COVID, keep it on the list. I agree with that 100%. I think all I was really trying to say is I think we should, this report that goes to council should be very upfront about what we accomplished and what we didn't. Because I think that's an important management signal that, like, hey, that, having 150 things on the list or 80 things on the list, probably too much. Maybe some of it was COVID. COVID was 3 years, they had 10 years. So for 7 of those years, they still didn't do anything. I just think we should be really upfront about what got done and what didn't. I think there's a bunch of data fields in the report that should be filled in. And if we just said, hey, COVID, couldn't get to it, that's good enough. But a blank entry is not good enough, because I think that should help. That should help inform the council as they're thinking about what they want to do next. I don't think we need to give them specific instructions, because I think they're going to do it anyway.
So is there anything you would like to add on to the vote?
Not for me.
Okay. Back to Commissioner Nunez. Okay.
I just have
Commissioner Clark, please.
I just have comments on the whole thing, so if we want to put this to bed first, we can. But
please continue. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think, when I was, I think I was still on EPC at the time when we voted to approve this general plan. And the reason that this is more than just a check the box sort of thing for me is I recall, in putting the general plan together, one of the most important elements of it was the implementation plan and all the actions associated with that. And a lot of time and effort went into it, and this is sort of the annual check-in of where all those stand. If you sit down and take the time to read it, which is hard to do, there's a lot of items in there. And it reminded me that at the time we spent an enormous amount of time, because you're trying to think 15, 20 years in advance and trying to figure out what are all the things that we might want to do in order to effectuate all of the goals that we have. And we came up with this list, and it's not totally exhaustive, but it's a really long list. And so I think that maybe helps explain why these things new things don't get added and things don't fall off. It's sort of, in a way, a constitution that, yes, it's a really, really long time horizon, but you sort of take a stab in the dark and say, well, maybe the telecommunications implementation plan will be an important piece of this to occur in the next 20 years. And so that's why it's actually pretty hard to remove these things because they're in the document. So you'd have to reopen the general plan in order to go in and say, we don't want to do adaptive building reuse, or we haven't focused on it so far, or that was a bad example. But there are certain things in here that we haven't gotten to, and we don't know when we'll get to. But we also don't want to forget that they were, an important piece of implementing some goal within the next 20 years under a certain heading. And so that's why it's a little bit unruly, I think. Anyway, at a high level, I guess what I'd say is this to me is really important, just in terms of checking in to see what's been completed, what's probably going to happen, what's in progress today, what might be in progress 4 to 10 years from now, but not necessarily removing things. Although if we did a general plan update as opposed to an entirely new general plan, then you can sort of go back in and say, okay, well, we've completed all these things. Here are some things that we might want to do in the nearer term. Here's some things we want to remove. But I think that in and of itself is a pretty long process. Like just creating the 2030 general plan was like a 3 to 4 year thing. Like it started in 2010. I think that's why we chose 2030, because it was a 20 year. So it's a big lift. I get that's just a really long way of saying, I'll vote to approve this report. I appreciate the knowing sort of where everything stands, even though there are some blanks. I think the broader question that council will probably tackle as part of its goal setting that sort of kicked off last night will be whether or not we want to reopen the general plan in some way, shape, or form, or whether or not we kick off an entirely new cycle. But those are really hefty questions that I don't think I'd be comfortable with weighing in on tonight. I have opinions on it, but I think for tonight, I'm generally supportive of accepting the report and recommending the council do the same. And it's really good timing because they'll be able to see this, I think, as part of their goal setting process and delve in and look at the areas that we've made progress on and the areas that we haven't made progress on.
Thank you. Commissioner Cranston, you had another comment?
I guess I would be comfortable with approving it, but just making a...
Your microphone.
Sorry. I'd be comfortable approving it, but just making a special note to council that the original general plan had an expectation that a lot of these things would be completed in 10 years, and that's this year. And so as you're looking at your plans, your goals and priorities, is to note those items as to whether there's, and they're making their work plan, should they be part of it or not? Because we are 10 years in from when it was approved. So that'd be my only.
Is that your motion?
Sure. So basically, I will move that we accept the general plan update and just pass on a notation to council that many items that are still incomplete were intended to be completed within 10 years, and that's this year. So to take that into account in the goal setting process.
Do we have a second? We do. Commissioner Haymeyer.
We'll do a roll call vote again.
Excuse me, can I just clarify? So the motion was to accept the report and also recommend that the council accept the report with the additional comment that Commissioner Cranston provided.
Absolutely, yes. Commissioner Nunez.
Yeah, I don't know, like, I super appreciate the comment and the spirit of it. I don't, like to me, the words really matter. I am far less interested in or really supportive of providing some communication that is backward looking at what was originally written in this document, especially, and I appreciate how much Commissioner Clark kind of shed some light on this. The process of creating this general plan is inherently very future looking, and things change. You try to hit the moving target of what the future might be, but I don't think that the expectation going into a general plan, you know, kind of like revamp, I won't even just say kind of like update or modify, but like a revamp, I don't think, and I could be wrong on this, but I don't, to my understanding, the expectation is not all of these things will be delivered. And so if we're going to make any additional commentary to council outside of just a straight approval, the way I would be supportive of that is not by referencing what was or was not completed as part of this general plan. It would be something along the lines of, and we have a sense that it would be worthwhile to look at whether kicking off a new general plan cycle or something to that effect. I'm not necessarily comfortable referencing things that were not completed in a document where I don't believe that the expectation going into it was that all those things would be completed. It's not like the housing element. So honestly, as of right now, my preference is to just vote for the straight approval. And that's kind of where I'm going with that.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go back to commissioners and ask if there is a second for Commissioner Cranston's motion. Okay, withdrawn.
I'm sorry, I had seconded it,
you
but
had
there
seconded,
was nothing
okay.
on the screen, so I'm happy if Commissioner Cranston withdraws that. I'm happy to do that. To me, I think the general plan is inherently a vision, right? Anyone looking at it would understand that some of the things we set out to do in 10 years would be delayed by a pandemic, or there are things that haven't gotten to on that list. I think council is very aware that we are approaching 2030, and I don't know what weight it carries to say we should be reopening this. That said, I think we want to make progress on the things that we had spelled out. The general plan development process was highly participatory. There was a lot of community input, and there's a lot of time and effort into describing what that vision is. So I don't know. I'm now leaning more toward Commissioner Nunez. I think we just approve it as is. I think these conversations are already underway, but if there's value and if signaling something from the Planning Commission that we need to take this more seriously and either retrospectively look at what might inform a future general plan, that's fine, but I just think we're getting into the weeds here in a way that isn't really going to change what council does in their goal setting.
So Commissioner Cranston, do you still withdraw? Vice Chair Dempsey, did you have anything to add?
If we're in the middle of a vote, I can save it until after. If we're still in deliberation, though.
We're still in deliberation.
Okay. I think all I would say, I actually don't think the transmittal is the important part here, in truth. The thing that I think is really important here is the data, because the council is going to decide this. That's their job. And so what I think, the way that we add value tonight, and by the way, I thought what Commissioner Clark said made a ton of sense. Maybe the point isn't to just go in and take things off the list. Maybe for historical reasons they should be on there. I think what really matters is simply to say, let's make this report. Let's fill in all those data fields. Let's give the council the best data that we can possibly give them, the most complete and fulsome set of data, because they can actually use it right now. And that's what I care about. So I would probably vote for any transmittal at this point, because it's not the comment that matters to me. It's that this is actually a really important document and a timely document. And I really just want to see us make sure all those data fields are filled in and we give a really good accounting of what we've been doing over the last 10 years so that the council can then do its job.
Okay, that to me sounds a little bit different than what Commissioner Cranston had put forward. I would still like to, just for housekeeping's sake, first go back to Commissioner Cranston and ask him if his motion is still valid or.
The first sentence in the analysis section of the staff report says the EPC is responsible for monitoring the implementation of the general plan, which may include review and prioritization of general plan actions that the city has not yet started. And at this point, it is not, this is telling us what has and has not been done. At this point, I would be challenged to then go in and say, if this is this in fact still the priority of council? And to say that we then need to go through and say, okay, we should review and prioritize the items that have not yet been completed as priorities when we go through our goal setting. And so part of the reason that I'm simply listing as noting it is, part of our job is to monitor progress, and the report says this is where we're at. And so the reason I was simply suggesting that we note back to council is, hey, it's been 10 years. These items were expected to be done within 10 years. Are these, I want you to note these things. If you're going to decide to do a general plan update, here's something to think about. If you want to do a whole general plan, here's something to think about. It feels like the part of it that says that we're then asked to review and prioritize, I don't believe I could adequately do that right now, because I don't know whether the items that are 10 years old are still priorities or not. I'm not looking for them, I'm not looking to say that they are or they are not. It's simply a way of communicating, hey guys, it's been 10 years. You asked us to monitor this. These items aren't done. In your thinking about what you're planning on doing, maybe you want to take a look at this. And so that's essentially what my motion is. It's not, this is what we should do. It's not recommending doing a 2050 general plan. It's not doing a general plan update. It's simply saying there's stuff that's not done. Take a look at it. If we don't have to say, if you think council will see it simply by looking at this report, as opposed to it just being a consent item and it just gets a checkbox, then I can withdraw it. That's my reason for including it, is I don't know whether to recommend the items that are on here that aren't completed or not. And so that's the reason that I was suggesting what we were suggesting. If that's not support for that, I'll withdraw it. But that's why I was putting it out there.
Commissioner Clark.
No, I understand. Just to respond, I think Vice Chair Dempsey makes a really good point. I think there would be, if I were just a average member of the public going in, it's very difficult to see what's been deprioritized, what hasn't been, what's still a big priority and what isn't, because a lot of these are intertwined with CIP projects that have their own priority, and that's why, as Commissioner Cranston said, it would be really hard to go in and sort of reprioritize things, because there's also the priorities the council's made on like CIP, and a lot of these things are infrastructure and other things. But I think overall, look, I'm fine with either form of the motion, but just moving this forward in one way or the other. My guess is that the council is probably already thinking about some of the items that they already in the back of their mind are prioritizing, especially on the CIP side, in terms of what they want. Hasn't happened in 10 years, and whether or not they want it to happen in the near term. Just because the tunnel under Central Expressway at San Antonio, that was a really, really big priority at the time that we did all this. It sort of fell off the map because Mayfield didn't get redeveloped the way everyone thought, and all sorts of other things, just as an example. So anyway, I'm fine with whatever folks want to do here. I understand the sentiments behind what's going on, or behind the concerns. So I'll support either way.
Commissioner Nunes.
Yep. So in terms of like things that we, like action items, basically, right? That we as a body put into effect. One of the questions that I'm trying to process here, whether it's, like data, whether it's, anything that's currently not in this progress report already, my question is, why isn't it, right? And in terms of like, for someone like me, I can look at a report like this and say, oh, it would be nice to have this, it would be nice to have that. But in terms of like how this report comes together, there's a whole like body of, staff resources that go into producing these reports. And so for me, I could say, if I imagine that, I had the power of 7 commissioners and I could singularly, vote however I wanted, and my vote was, hey, staff, go collect this data, what is the process of what's not in the report being created? How much work is that? Like, for me, I would want to understand, why isn't it there already? Is a better approach for us to ask council as part of this, for example, like work setting or goal setting, to not just, or for us not to just kind of say, hey, staff, go get this information out there without knowing what the work impacts are to an already stretched out staff, versus maybe in some shape or form, when we say to council, hey, when you're thinking about this expiring general plan, think about the reporting mechanism that goes into that. Think about what resources you're going to need to enable and empower staff to collect this information. What is the relevant information that would constitute public transparency? Because right now, I'm not really clear on what amount of work would go into collecting this, how much follow-up we're asking of staff, and if it's even necessarily, what the impact is to relevance. So I'm personally not really comfortable with that. Maybe it's really easy to do, and my comments are totally moot, and that might change my mind. But as of right now, I'm not really comfortable with anything outside of the approval.
Okay, just for my own clarification here, I'm going to chime in and just say that it sounds to me that there's a presentation question and how this gets presented. And I don't know if that is something that council needs to be noted or if it's a staff thing, just in how the information is presented. That sounds to me like that's one of the issues. There are several discussion points, and I just wanted to add that I myself look at the general plan as sort of the guideline. It's so far in the future from when it was made that it is sort of, milestones you're trying to hit. And if you don't hit it, maybe that's what you're discussing. Did we hit it? That's just in the presentation of the material. So I don't want to add my thoughts into what you were saying, but that's sort of what I was getting from that. Staff had mentioned that their work plan, they're working on it now, and someone had already brought up the idea of sort of cleaning house on that kind of thing. So that's going to come before the EPC, and I feel like the recording of this could just be like copied and pasted in there when it comes up in discussion of what we would recommend they put on their work plan. Because as Commissioner Nunes stated, it's going to take a lot of staff effort. There's things that we don't quite understand how involved it is in order to make changes to the general plan. So I want to first then just take a quick straw poll, because a motion was made and it was seconded. I do want to just find out if there is support for adding a note that we suggest or recommend to council? Please, Commissioner Grenston, help me with your motion.
Simply to note to council that many items in the 2030 general plan had timelines that took them out to be completed by 2023.
Okay.
It's now 2023, and many of those items are not complete. And that they, just to note to them that as they're doing their goal setting, to take a look through those to determine whether or not any of those may influence their decision process on their goals.
Okay.
That's it.
And Commissioner Haymeyer, you had seconded. I wanted to double check with you.
Yeah, I'm still fine supporting that, but if there's not a majority, I'm fine to withdraw and have a straight up and down.
Quick straw poll on adding that in as a note.
I'm okay with it.
My vote on this straw poll is I need direct clarification from Mr. Anderson right now. When you said earlier that council was talking about, you said something about one of the council people was talking about like updates and such, and if I think that's what we're referencing here, I'm gonna like very directly, was the proposed work item being discussed a general plan update or new cycle launch versus like zoning amendment, modification, cleanup type stuff?
It was a very high level comment or proposal about maintaining our municipal code and our charter specifically. I brought it up as an example of awareness about this issue of maintaining our policies. I don't think that the council member was thinking of the general plan action plan when he brought it up. That being said, you know, I think there's one of the goals that Councilmember Ramirez had when he brought it up last night was maybe there are things that we literally can't enforce. Maybe there are things that are actually holding us back by being in our code that we really, really need to clean up. And then I'll just kind of say, you know, this list that we have that we're reporting on, not too many consequences of it being there, right? As opposed to some code language that is, you know, either unenforceable or counterproductive in the way that it's enforced, that needs to be cleaned up. So I will make that distinction, just kind of reading the tea leaves there. I hope that answers your question.
Great. So then the reason I asked that is because Chair Yin, I heard you mention as part of, you know, kind of like corralling this group here, that part of the thinking was that this was
that it might be on the
right, yeah. And from what I'm hearing, Mr. Anderson, would you characterize what I heard was that it wouldn't necessarily be characterized, correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't want to put words in your mouth, as a general plan review more than a high level thinking through the municipal code writ large. And so I just want to make sure that the premises we were working on were very clear here. I don't support like going through the, you know, fine-tooth comb with this. I also don't support just saying, you know, yes to things for saying yes to it. So that's, yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
If a commissioner wanted to segment the vote to just vote on whether or not to recommend acceptance of this annual report, and then separately have a motion to include a comment in the transmittal memo, you could do it in those two steps.
Okay, let's go for that, because it sounds like there was a lot of support for approving the recommendation from staff. So
Yeah, yes.
I was gonna, we could do it as a, I could make a substitute motion, and then we could
Sure.
do whatever.
Thank you,
That way we
Commissioner.
sort of clear what's on the floor. And so I will, recognizing there's already a motion and a second on the floor, I'll procedurally make a substitute motion that we recommend, that the EPC recommend to the City Council that they accept the 2022 General Plan Annual Progress Report, Exhibit 1 of the EPC staff report.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll do a roll call. Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Commissioner Cranston,
Aye.
Commissioner Haymeyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Nunes,
Aye.
Vice Chair Dempsey,
Aye.
and Chair In.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0 with Commissioner Gutierrez absent.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we'll go back to the idea of adding a transmittal to council, a note. There was a motion. I'm going to ask Commissioner Cranston, who authored it, to go ahead and state it again.
I recommend that EPC note to council that the 2030 general plan had actions that had a timeline of completion within 10 years, which would be 2023, and to note those items as not being complete as part of their goal-setting evaluation process.
Do we have a second?
It's not a second, it's more a clarification, if I may, for staff. Would this just be in the narrative of the staff report? Like
Yeah.
that first page, and then you have the attachment?
Yep.
Yep, okay, thanks.
She's waving her hand.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's just not on the screen, so yes, I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a motion. Yes, discussion. Any comments? Further comments? Then we'll take a vote.
Okay. Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Commissioner Cranston,
Aye.
Commissioner Haymeyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Nunes,
Aye.
Vice Chair Dempsey,
Aye.
and Chair In.
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0 with Commissioner Gutierrez absent.
Okay, thank you so much. With that closure, we will now move to item 6, commission staff announcements, updates, requests, and committee reports. No action will be taken on any questions raised by the commission at this time. Do we have any reports from commissioners or announcements?
I'll just say a few things. First off, we're expecting the housing element revised draft to be publicly available on Monday. March 15th will be the EPC's opportunity to review and make a recommendation on those changes. So we're hopefully giving you guys a little bit of extra time to review it. We are tentatively scheduling the retreat that you guys asked for one of the meetings in May. So we'll have that, have more information about that soon. You know, I think we've been hearing a lot about just the council discussion of their priorities and proposed projects. And I'm just going to make that announcement as well, but it's been announced a couple of times already.
Commissioner Cranston.
So a request. I'm not sure what the process is, but I shouldn't have to read that in the voice that there has been an announcement about the housing element. The release is not on the housing element webpage. The description of what is coming forward was not shared with the EPC. It's not out in some place where it's easily found. And so that release needs to be linked to the housing element webpage, because part of what we got back from HCD is we're not communicating, okay? So it shouldn't be a mystery. The only reason I could find it was because the voice was good enough to embed the link. But you can't get to that from anything associated with the housing element. We need to be transparent about what's coming, what's happening, and the voice is not the only place where people can. There's a lot of people that subscribe to that page, and so I request that staff add that item onto the Housing on What webpage so people can see what was released to the public through the email list that's out there. Okay. Thank you.
Any other updates or requests from the commission? No? All right, seeing none, the meeting will be adjourned. It is currently, sorry, my glasses are a little foggy, 9:08 p.m. And the next regularly scheduled EPC meeting will be held on March 15th, 2023.